Is heaven a fairy story? I just saw an article. This is in a British publication, The Express, in London, I believe, UK. And it's titled, Life After Death. Physicist Stephen Hawking rejected the afterlife in scathing attack as a, quote, fairy story. Now, of course, Stephen Hawking died a couple of years ago, March 2018. And he was one of the preeminent physicists of our time, and author of an important book, A Brief History of Time, that was an international bestseller. Interestingly, in this interview that apparently he gave earlier, but it has just come out, Hawking talks about the fact that he really can't believe in the concept of an afterlife. Now, he doesn't really invoke directly scientific evidence, but he says that it's obvious to him that it is, quote, a fairy story. And he implies that it's the product of, quote, wishful thinking. Now, this is what I want to examine a little more closely, because Hawking here is not alone. In fact, it was Sigmund Freud almost, I think over a century ago now, who had made the argument that belief in an afterlife, belief in heaven in particular, and belief in God is, quote, wishful thinking. Freud wrote a book about religion called The Future of an Illusion. And Freud made the argument that we have a human desire to believe that things will come out all right. We have a desire to hope out of expectation that there will be a wonderful future waiting for us. And so we invent this imaginary God and we invent this imaginary heaven to meet this human, down-to-earth desire for what Freud defines as wish fulfillment. This has happened to me more than once, but in one of my debates with Christopher Hitchens, this exact issue came up, and he basically made the point that heaven is adult Disneyland. He goes, oh, you've got all these imaginary wonders. And he goes, that's why you Christians believe this stuff, because it's kind of comforting to think that death is not the end, it's not extinction, that you've got this kind of marvelous, amazing thing waiting for you. And so this is an attempt to sort of give an account for, it's not an attempt to refute heaven, but it's an attempt to account for it by giving a kind of practical or human explanation for why believers might make something like that up. Now, I want to say why I think that this argument really doesn't work. It is true that heaven is kind of the marvelous place where no bad things happen. And so if life is difficult and you have hardship, you have suffering, you have sickness, you have death, you have diabetes, arguably such a person might be inclined to make up heaven. Why? Because in heaven you have no sickness, no suffering, no death, no diabetes. But here's my point. Christianity, and certainly the Abrahamic religions, aren't just about heaven. If they just made that one up, your argument might work. But Christianity and Islam and Judaism also have another idea. It's called hell. And by the way, hell is a lot worse than sickness, and it's a lot worse than suffering, and it's a lot worse than death. It's a lot worse than diabetes. So my question is this: if believers were essentially people who want adult Disneyland, why would you make up the concept of hell? Where'd that one come from? That clearly didn't come from wish fulfillment. None of us wishes to be in hell. So the very fact that you've got almost say a cosmological scheme on the part of the believer that includes heaven and hell, in which you're morally accountable and you can end up in one place or the other, totally destroys the idea that this is purely some sort of adult Disneyland. The bottom line of it is, you can believe or you cannot believe. But you can't write off believers as if they are merely people who are engaging in some kind of childish wish fulfillment, because their religious beliefs alone, just taken for what they actually are, don't fit that definition.